Good morning. This is Pastor Zach with the Goodland United Methodist Church with the morning devotion for Wednesday, May 23rd. Today I'll be reading from Psalm 29. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory of his name. Worship the Lord in holy splendor. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord over mighty waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon skip like a calf, and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord causes the oaks to whirl and strips the forest bare. And in his temple all say, Glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. I want to share with you some reflections on this verse from Nancy DeClass Walford, who is a professor of Old Testament and Biblical Language at McAfee School of Theology in Atlanta, Georgia. She writes, many scholars say that Psalm 29 is one of the earliest Hebrew psalm compositions, an adaptation or an incorporation of various elements of hymns to Baal, the Canaanite fertility and weather god. But Psalm 29 borrows these elements and turns them on their heads. The message of Psalm 29 is that God, not Baal, is the God whom the Israelites can rely on to rule over creation and provide peace for the land and the people. In the first two verses of the psalm, the word ascribe occurs 3 times. The Hebrew word means give, suggesting perhaps a better translation of acknowledge could be used. The psalmist calls upon hearers to acknowledge the Lord's glory and strength, and the glory of the Lord's name. The hearers who are called to acknowledge the Lord in verse 1 are heavenly beings, or in Hebrew the words mean children of God. These passages tell us that God is present in all of the magnificent, awe-inspiring, and sometimes terrifying elements of creation. But as we see in the story of Elijah's encounter with God in 1 Kings, sometimes God is present in a sheer silence, what some of us have learned as the still small voice. The central message of Psalm 29, thus, is that God is sovereign, and God's reign extends to all creation and all manifestations. Verse 10 announces that Yahweh sits enthroned over the flood, that God sits enthroned as king forever. The word translated sits enthroned in Hebrew means simply to sit, to dwell, to settle down, to occupy. God sits or dwells over the earth and dwells or settles down in the midst of the people as sovereign. The first and only mention of humankind in Psalm 29 is verse 11. May the Lord bless his peoples with peace. And with so many of the enthronement psalms that happen, humanity is not the focus. Rather, the focus is on God's sovereignty. Psalm 29 ought to make us stop and consider. Remind us of God's sovereignty over God's good creation, and indeed invoke in us a little cosmic humility. The message of Psalm 29 may best be summed up in the closing words of the Lord's Prayer. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. We'd like to invite you to worship with us Sundays at 10:30 at the Goodland United Methodist Church on the corner of 12th and Sherman in Goodland. This Sunday we'll be starting a 3-week worship series called Bread, Bath, and Beyond. We'll look at the basic elements of our faith through communion, baptism, and what it takes us to beyond in our life, beyond our fears, beyond our doubts, beyond what we see to the eternal. We hope to see you on Sundays. Have a blessed day.